Welcome to my channel, The Light Within, Chapter 3, the 120-year conversation nobody told you about. Have you ever had a gut feeling about something, a sense that a situation was wrong, that a person couldn't be trusted, that a decision was a mistake, before you could explain why, and then later the explanation caught up and proved you right? We call that intuition, but where did it come from? Something in you knew before your conscious reasoning did. Something was processing that your awareness hadn't caught up to yet. Scientists sometimes work the same way. A feeling that the standard explanation is incomplete before they can prove it, which we also call the hypothesis. When I first started exploring the data that the brain might be filtering consciousness rather than producing it, my instinct was, this sounds interesting, but is it just me? Is this my personal theory? Or does it have any real intellectual weight behind it? So I went looking, and I found 6 people who got there before me, independently through completely different fields across 120 years. A psychologist who built the foundation of modern psychology, a philosopher who won the Nobel Prize, a novelist who changed literature, a cognitive scientist at a major American university, a philosopher with PhDs in both philosophy and computer science, and the engineer who invented the microchip. None of them were talking to each other. All of them landed in roughly the same place. That's worth paying attention to. Chapter 1 named the question this series is built around. What if the brain is a filter, not a factory? Chapter 2 showed exactly why that question matters. Because the factory model, for all the brilliant science behind it, still cannot explain why brain activity feels like anything at all. The hard problem of consciousness remains genuinely open. Today, we stop treating the filter theory as just an analogy. We give it a history and some serious company. Person 1, William James, 1898. William James essentially built modern psychology from scratch in the late 1800s. Rigorous, evidence-driven, deeply skeptical of anything not grounded in real observation. And yet, in 1898, he stood up at a lecture hall at Harvard and proposed something almost nobody remembers today. He called it the transmission theory of mind. Instead of thinking of the brain as producing consciousness, consider the possibility that the brain might be transmitting consciousness, the way a prism transmits and shapes light that already exists. He arrived at this not from mysticism, but from gaps he noticed in the science. The founder of modern psychology thought the brain might be a receiver. We just collectively decided not to talk much about it. The second person, Henry Bergson. Henry Bergson won the Nobel Prize in 1927, not for physics or chemistry, but for literature. Because his philosophical writing was considered so profound, it crossed into art. His proposal, the brain's job might not be to create your experience of reality, but to narrow it down. Human beings might be exposed to a much vaster stream of experience than we normally access, and the brain's role could be to filter that down to the practical slice needed to function in daily life. Under this framing, the brain isn't giving you more. It might be giving you less, deliberately. The third person is Aldous Huxley. Aldous Huxley wrote Brave New World. He was also a serious intellectual who called the brain a reducing valve in the 1950s. His idea, the mind might, in its natural state, have access to something far larger. He called it mind at large. The brain's job might be to reduce that vast potential down to the trickle that lets you function. 3 people, 3 different fields. Strikingly similar metaphor, worth noticing, even if none of it is proven. The fourth person is Donald Hoffman. Donald Hoffman is a cognitive scientist at UC Irvine with decades of peer-reviewed research. He proposes the interface theory of perception. Evolution doesn't necessarily select for seeing reality accurately. It selects for survival. So our perceptions might have evolved to be useful rather than true. His analogy, your computer desktop. When you drag a file icon, you don't think you're literally moving software through silicon. The icon is an interface. Hoffman proposes that what we call the physical world might work similarly, as an interface, our minds use to navigate rather than as a reality itself. He is careful, however, to note this is a theoretical proposal published in peer-reviewed literature. Bernardo Kastrup holds PhDs in both philosophy and computer science and worked as a scientist at CERN. He proposes analytic idealism, that consciousness might be the fundamental ground of reality and the physical world might be what consciousness looks like from a certain perspective. He frames this carefully as a philosophical proposal, not an empirical claim. Critics disagree. The debate is ongoing and genuinely interesting. Person 6. Federico Faggin. Federico Faggin invented the microchip, the Intel 4004 in 1971, the direct ancestor of every chip in every device you own. After decades building computing systems, he concluded the opposite of what you might expect, that consciousness cannot be reduced to computation, that it is not an output of information processing, but something more fundamental. This is his personal and philosophical view, not a peer-reviewed scientific conclusion, but it carries particular weight coming from the man who built the machine. So to close, 6 people, 1898 to today, all of them through independent paths arriving at the same possibility we named in Chapter 1, that the brain might not be producing consciousness, it might be filtering it. None of them proved it, but they all found the conventional explanation inadequate. And that kind of independent convergence across fields, across centuries, without collaboration, is the closest thing to a signpost that serious inquiry can offer. Now, if the brain really is a kind of filter, what happens when the filter gets disrupted or injured? That's Chapter 4, and the cases are remarkable. So, in essence, William James proposed in 1898 that the brain might transmit rather than produce consciousness, arriving at this through gaps in conventional science, not mysticism. This is a verified historical fact, but the theory itself is unproven. Henry Bergson, Nobel Prize winner, suggested that the brain might narrow down a larger stream of experience rather than generate it from scratch. This is a philosophical proposal and not proven. Aldous Huxley described the brain as a possible reducing valve, limiting rather than creating awareness. It's a philosophical idea and not proven. Donald Hoffman proposes in peer-reviewed work that physical reality might function more like an interface than a direct window onto what's real. It's a serious scientific proposal and actively debated. Bernardo Kastrup argues philosophically that consciousness might be fundamental. It is again a philosophical position and actively debated. Federico Faggin, inventor of the microchip, believes consciousness cannot be replicated by computation. It is a personal philosophical conviction and not scientific proof. None of these positions are proven. What's notable is how many serious thinkers across different fields independently ask the same question. Chapter 4 takes the theory out of the philosophical and into the real world. We are going to look at documented cases, a man who hit his head and woke up able to play piano, a man who began perceiving the mathematical structure of physical reality, and a scientist who found a way to temporarily change what the brain lets through using magnetic pulses. Whatever is or is not happening, these cases are genuinely extraordinary. In fact, the next 3 chapters, chapters 4, 5, and 6, are my most favorite chapters in this entire series. So I hope you would not miss. Before I let you go, which of the 6 thinkers from today surprised you most? Drop their name in the comments. I'm curious whether it lands harder coming from a scientist, a philosopher, or the engineer who built the microchip.